Hotel near Liverpool Street. So anyone that was there, this is likely to seem quite familiar, this material. But you're very welcome to stay again, of course. If you're of a tweeting disposition, then I'm led to believe that my colleagues will be actively tweeting using the UK Perception hashtag throughout the course of today's webinar. Hopefully that doesn't mean we get caught up with lots of tweets about perceptions about the UK more generally, but I'm assured by my colleagues that that's the best thing to do. So if you want to tweet, that's what you need to do. Just a brief moment on where this research fits in with our research more generally. So some of you will now be familiar with this rather delightful picture, which sort of shows the 4 quadrants of our research, if you like. Consulting market trends, with which many of you are familiar. That's where you'll find our UK consulting market report, for example. Content strategy, which is where you'll find white space and all thought leadership related stuff. Growth strategy, an area of real growth for us at the moment, actually, probably mainly because of a particularly busy deals market. So our strategic planning program sits there, global trends in the consulting market, but also a lot of work around mergers and acquisitions and strategy and positioning more generally for firms. And then this last quadrant, the client feedback quadrant, from which we draw today's research. So today's research is taken from our UK client perception report, which is part of the broader client perception program. A program that is divided by geography because it's we consider it important to do that. There are usually quite striking differences, not only in opinions about firms, but in firms themselves from one region to the next, something that's probably a matter for separate debate. But I remember a comment from someone not so long ago who said, you know, there's more difference between BCG's Boston and London offices than there is between BCG and McKinsey in the US. And I think that's a telling thing and reminds us that we need to consider client perceptions in terms of geography. So that's where today's research comes from. That's how it fits in. You're here, we point out rather helpfully. So what are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to answer 2 questions. We want to know what clients think about consulting firms, and we want to know why they think what they think, which turns out to be perhaps the most interesting question here. It's really important to note that we ask clients about individual firms, and so although a lot of what I'm going to present in today's relatively short session, this is just a brief introduction to the report, which by the way will be due out very, very shortly. So although we ask clients about individual firms, we're going to look at some of their responses in aggregate. It's really important to note that we're doing the aggregating. We didn't ask clients at any point to talk about firms in aggregate. They were only ever responding to questions about individual firms. So we've done that aggregating. But as I say, so there's that, and there's why they think what they think, which turns out to be a particularly interesting area. So who did we ask? We asked 130 clients in the UK. So part of a much bigger survey, global survey of nearer 600, I think. 130 were from the UK, and we asked those people to talk about the 3 firms they felt most qualified to share an opinion about, and we provide them with a list of 20 firms to choose from, and frankly all the usual names that you would expect were on that list. They were provided with the opportunity to tell us about firms that weren't on the list, although as I'm sure you can appreciate, with a sample of 130, we simply didn't have sufficient responses on some smaller firms to be able to talk about them with any kind of statistical validity. So there may be some interesting results that come out of the more broad global research where smaller firms are concerned, and certainly I think this is a piece of research more generally that is or should be of interest to small firms, not least because they're the ones competing with the big firms, and understanding what clients think of those bigger firms is quite useful. But unsurprisingly, most responses collected around a relatively small number of big global firms. These were end users, not procurement people, so these were the end buyer of consulting services. I know we do a lot of work with procurement departments, but not on this occasion. About a third were at CXO level or direct reports, and our research that we've done for many years tells us that that's where most consulting tends to get bought. The other 69% describe themselves as senior managers. So these are pretty senior people, the sort of people that tend to buy consulting that you would consider to be your prospects and clients. Split about 50-50 between front and back office functions. So front office, we're talking here about things like, marketing, sales, customer services, that kind of thing. Back office, obviously, things like finance and IT and operations. And about 45% in organisations which had more than 5,000 employees. So we tend to be talking to people in pretty big organisations here. I haven't got the proportion who were in organisations with more than 1,000, but I think that would account for a very significant proportion of the total. So we're talking about people in big organisations here, very typically multinationals. 2/3 of people were over 40. It's a little unclear at the moment about the extent to which that is important, but we wanted to ask the question, and I wanted to sort of mention it here. There are people who are asking us to do more deeper dives into our data to kind of understand whether that has an impact, because I think it's potentially quite an interesting area, but not something I'm going to mention here today. Important just to perhaps throw it in so you know about it. And from a range of different sectors, so sectors that are broadly representative of the UK's consulting market, so financial services particularly well represented, quite a lot of public sector people in here as well. But as I say, a pretty broad spectrum that's kind of in line with what you'd expect from the UK consulting market. What do we ask them about? Well, we asked them about quality of service. So we asked them whether they thought quality was very high, average, low, or very low across a range of traditional consulting services: strategy, operational improvement, HR and change management, financial management and risk, technology, these kind of things. So we asked them to talk about whether they thought the firm they were commenting on how they saw quality in relation to those services for that firm. And we asked them about the characteristics of consulting firms. What are the characteristics that are important in a firm, and how do they see the consulting firms they were talking about shaping up against those characteristics? That turned out, for me at least, to be one of the most interesting areas of the research. We asked them, unsurprisingly, about price, and when we did, we also asked them about value, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. But we also asked them about factors which influence perceptions, which is the why they think what they think bit, and the bit that, as I said, turns out, I think, to be particularly interesting. Not least because this helps us to understand how consulting firms can change perceptions, how you can influence the views people have of your firm. So, in simple terms, that's what we were asking people about. What did they tell us? Well, let's start with quality. So 16% of people, averaged across all different types of consulting services, told us that they thought quality was very high. 37% told us that they thought quality was high. So we've got 53, yes, that's right, isn't it? 53% of people already telling us that quality is either high or very high, averaged across all consulting services and all firms. So pretty positive message coming from UK clients. We've then got 40% of people saying quality was average. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And a much smaller proportion saying they thought it was either poor, that's 7%, or very poor, just 1%. So on the surface of it, this looks like pretty positive data. There's only 8% of people down there at the bottom with red faces who are saying quality is either poor or very poor. But I think we need to ask a question about the 40% who are saying quality is average, because I would certainly contend that those are not really very happy people. You don't really get a management consultant in and pay management consulting rates to get average quality. So I think we need to be careful about where we draw the line here, and I would suggest that the line needs to be drawn above rather than below the 40% in terms of understanding the difference between the positives and the negatives, if you like. I would put those 40% in the group that we need to think about working on, which means that we're roughly split half and half between people who are probably having a pretty good time and people who aren't, who think there's room for improvement. So I think some work to be done, and certainly that speaks to what we hear anecdotally from clients, and many of you will be aware we speak a lot to many clients around the UK in in-depth phone interviews and indeed in person, and hear quite a lot of cynicism in the UK about consulting and about consulting firms. So I think that speaks to that to some extent. Nevertheless, I don't want to detract from the fact that there are 53% of people who are clearly quite happy with the quality of consulting that they're getting. What else did they tell us? Well, they told us a bit about what consultants are particularly good at and what consultants aren't so good at. So they told us that consultants are best at clear thinking. I think that speaks to some extent to the power and influence of thought leadership these days, where clear thinking is clearly a bit of an important thing. They say that they're best at sector knowledge. Again, a really important thing, understood to be by many clients and consultants now, I think, to be the key to a lot of consulting opportunity in the UK, as indeed it is globally. And best as well at being pragmatic, accountable, and client-focused, all kind of qualities that clients see as being very important in consulting firms. What are they worst at? Well, they're worst at coaching clients. So I think this is a really interesting area and is particularly important when it comes to the implementation phase of consulting projects. And I think clients tend to be a little bit more guarded about how well consultants are managing to kind of work alongside them to transfer knowledge, to train, to motivate, to educate. These are qualities that consulting firms haven't sort of naturally done exhibited in the past, and ones that are increasingly important to clients. So I think some work to be done there. Work to be done in a related area around cultural fit. Clients really talk about the importance of cultural fit a lot, particularly when it comes to implementation. And I think a feeling that some work needs to be done there. And a particularly interesting one, I think, around about sharing information around a network. So clients are aware, certainly in the case of most of the firms that they're talking about for today's purposes, that these are global firms who can kind of tick the box of being present in many countries. But what they want to know is that you can be joined up amongst those countries. It's not just about coverage, it's about actually having a genuinely global mindset. And this is where also they talk a lot about the role of the account manager being an aggregator, an organizer, a facilitator, a disseminator of information from around this global network. They talk a lot about the importance of that role. But in truth, there aren't huge differences between what clients say consulting firms are really good at and what they say they're not so good at. The number of people talking about firms being good or very good at these things, and the number of people saying that they're not so good, it's not massive here. We're not really uncovering huge differences here. So where is the difference? Well, there are some differences by segment, or to put it another way, by firm type. So most segments, most firm types seem to be pretty strong in terms of both sector knowledge and clarity of thinking, but then there are some differences. So strategy firms, for example, tend to do best in terms of influence, their ability to influence important internal stakeholders within an organization. And I have no doubt that brand plays an important role in that. Technology firms do best where tools and methods are concerned. Again, perhaps not entirely surprising. Tools and methods are kind of part of the stock in trade of these type of firms, so thought to be stronger here than other firms. Big Four firms doing particularly well in terms of their willingness to challenge, or to put it another way, to be honest. Really important to clients. I think when we speak to clients over the phone or in person and sort of say, what would you change about consulting firms? What do they need to do better? We often hear these two words, honesty and listening, coming to the fore time and time again. So honesty is massively important to consulting firms. They don't want someone that just comes in there and complies to their thoughts. They want someone who will challenge them. And Big Four firms are thought to do particularly well in that respect relative to other firms. HR firms, again, perhaps unsurprisingly, seem to be best in terms of fitting in, probably appreciating the softer aspects of a consulting project and managing to fit in. So there are some subtle differences from one segment to the next. But in truth, they're not massively surprising. Strategy firms are the most likely to be talked about as being thought of as either high or very high quality for strategy consulting. Not entirely surprising. There's 64% of clients saying that quality is high or very high for strategy firms, compared with slightly lower numbers talking about the same thing for Big Four technology and HR firms. Technology firms are thought to be particularly good at technology consulting, unsurprisingly. 50% of people saying that quality is very high or high for technology consulting amongst technology firms. So not massively surprising there. A couple of things to point out here. I think HR firms do seem to suffer a little bit in quite a few respects. So more likely to be described as, more likely that quality will be described as either low or very low for both strategy and technology. Obviously within our report we talk about all different types of consulting services. So some concern here around HR firms. I think, although it doesn't show itself too clearly here, overall I would say that the finding of our report suggests that Big Four firms are perhaps more likely to be viewed as average than others, thought generally to be professional, to do a good job, but you know, you're more likely to get average views where quality is concerned than you are for other types of firm. So again, not massively surprising results. If you're looking for the big differences, this is where you find them. You find them in the difference between indirect clients and direct clients. Let me explain those. Direct clients are people that you're working with now. We can probably take direct off that and just call them clients. They're people who are actively engaging the services of your firm at the moment or have done so in the very recent past. Indirect clients are clients that are aware of you, clients who may have worked with you in the past, who are aware of you through you having worked elsewhere in their organisations, who in some cases have even worked for you in the past. So they feel qualified to share an opinion about you. They're clearly aware of what you do. They have some kind of opinion, but they're not actively working with you now. So another way to look at this, in a sense, is in terms of the difference between clients and prospects. Those indirect clients are, to all intents and purposes, your prospects. And the differences between these two are not only stark, but tell us a lot about the difference in the market between expectations of your firm and the reality that people experience when they're actually working with you. So I'm going to talk for the rest of this a lot about that, the difference between those two groups. Let's just go on for a minute there. So indirect, like quality average. Well, not entirely surprising there. So they're not actually actively working with you at the moment, so they tend to sit on the fence a little bit in terms of quality. They haven't quite decided whether you're either good or bad. So much more likely to say that quality is average. They're much more likely to expect value to be in line with fees paid. And again, once again, because they're not actively working with you now, they don't have a kind of polarized view in terms of whether they're getting a decent return of their investment or bad return of their investment. So they're more likely to say, we expect to get roughly what we pay in fees. Sorry, just dealing with a few technical problems at my end. Apparently my computer is overloaded. Quite what that means I don't know, but if everything explodes in a minute, then bear with us. We'll reschedule. Hopefully you can still hear me. So indirect clients expecting value to be in line with fees paid. That's a slightly simplistic way, you might say, of talking about value, but actually it's a very useful one in our experience, because it's quite useful asking clients whether they think they're getting more in value than they paid in fees or less in value than they paid in fees. Is quite a useful way of they tend to have quite a clear sense of that. So anyway, indirect clients expect that to be about average. Indirect clients are more likely to think that consultants will bring clarity in their thinking, which I think speaks to some extent to, again, the role of thought leadership. So although thought leadership isn't massively influential compared with other factors, and we'll see more about this later, in influencing opinions about a firm for indirect clients, I think it does do a very particular thing, which gives people a sense of there being clarity in thinking. And they're more likely to say that reports and presentations are influential. This, I think, is particularly important. So these are the reports and presentations that you deliver as part of a consulting project. And I think it's probably fair to say that most people expect their direct client to be the kind of the most important person in terms of who that material gets delivered to. Actually, what we find is that indirect clients are massively influenced by the reports and presentations that you deliver into either their organization or elsewhere. In other words, the work you do is finding a wider audience. It's being disseminated more widely than perhaps you might be appreciating, and it's having quite a significant impact on the views of your firm amongst the people that it does hit. So for some people, of course, this is the only way they have a perception of what you do and the quality of your work. So really important, I think, to understand the wider implication of the reports and presentations that you deliver as part of a consulting project. Direct clients, well, more likely to have a polarized view about quality and fees by contrast to indirect clients, surprisingly. Market rate quality is high or very high. Good news in itself, I suppose, because it suggests that actually when you're doing a job for clients, they're more likely to say that the quality of what you're delivering is high or very high than indirect clients are. But I think, particularly in the case of the UK, we need to kind of see the flip side of that, which is that indirect clients are much less likely to talk about quality being high or very high. And once again, I think that just speaks to the extent to which UK clients are a little bit cynical about consulting. Why is it that direct clients are, if you like, so pleasantly surprised? What was it that was? Why was their expectation of lower quality before you started working for them? More likely to rate consultants higher for cultural fit and sector knowledge. Once again, I think we can see that both positively and negatively. Why is the expectation not as high as the reality here? So some interesting distinctions or differences between indirect and direct clients coming to the fore. It's also interesting in the extent to which there is an uplift or a downlift, perhaps, between the views of direct and indirect clients. So, for example, when it comes to strategy firms, 25% of direct clients are the 25% more direct clients will talk about quality or value, sorry, being in excess of the fees that they paid. So there's a pleasant uplift set against expectations for strategy firms. So there's an expectation that people aren't going to get value from strategy firms, and then in reality, direct clients, 25% more of them say, actually, we're getting good value for money here. So quite a significant uplift. Less significant for big four firms, but nevertheless still an uplift. So there's more direct clients talking about value being higher than there are indirect clients. Things go the other way for technology firms. So actually there's an expectation in the market that's not quite matched by reality when it comes to technology firms. The direct clients of technology firms are being a little disappointed in terms of value. That may be because they start with such high expectations, but either way, they're feeling a little let down, I think it's fair to say. And HR firms, well, there's pretty much parity in terms of how direct clients and indirect clients see value. So quite interesting differences between one firm type and another in terms of how views change between indirect and direct clients where value is concerned. Let's dive into one firm here. So let's pick on McKinsey for a second, and I'm picking on them partly because there's quite a positive story to do here. Obviously, we talk about this chart and lots of others through our report for a large number of firms, but just wanted to kind of draw out something here about McKinsey because it tells us something more about this kind of value piece. So 43% of McKinsey's indirect clients are saying that they think that the value that they're going to get is less than the amount that they pay. A really significant proportion. I would argue that's 43% of people who aren't, frankly, going to do business with McKinsey. Why would you get a firm in if you think that what they're going to deliver is going to be less than what you pay in fees? 29%, so slightly less than the third, saying they think of indirect clients, saying they think value is going to be around the amount they paid, and a similar proportion saying they think it's going to be twice what they paid. Note that no indirect clients at all were saying they thought value was going to be 5 or 10 times what they paid. And by the way, we do see people talking about value being 5 or 10 times the amount they pay quite frequently for some other firms. The important thing here, though, is the contrast between indirect clients and direct clients. So when we move to direct clients, there's nobody here talking about McKinsey saying that they think value is less than what they paid in fees. So that 43% has disappeared now. People are really happy. Of course, I would argue, as I say, that 43% won't become direct clients in the first place. Nevertheless, there's just no direct clients who are saying they're getting less than they paid in fees. There's an uplift in terms of the number of people who are saying they're getting about what they paid. So 50%, half of people saying value is about what we paid in fees. And again, going back to that first slide earlier on, I think we need to be a little cautious about this is that kind of average view, and I'm not convinced that is enough. But you know, this is certainly a more positive picture than it was amongst indirect clients. And there's another 50%, so another half, talking about value being twice what they paid. The important thing here is that the view amongst direct clients is more positive than it is amongst indirect clients, which I think, you know, asks of McKinsey why there is that view. Is this something to do with how high fees are? Why is there this view amongst indirect clients that it's going to be pretty hard to get value from the consulting project on which McKinsey is working? But you know, looking at it from a positive point of view, direct clients really seem to be quite happy here. Actually, when people get to working with McKinsey, they're pleasantly surprised. They're getting a lot of value for what they pay. So as I say, we kind of do that for each firm in our report. And now this question of why people think what they think. We asked about 7 factors that we know as being particularly important as having an impact on perception. And we saw some really interesting things here. So let's start, for example, with that standout piece of data, the 73% of indirect clients who say that reports and presentations have a significant impact on their perception of a consulting firm. You know, these are people who weren't the original intended audience of this material, but for whom this has a huge impact on their views about a firm. So again, this material is being disseminated more widely. People are having access to your material that perhaps weren't the original intended recipients, and it's having a very significant bearing on what they think about your firm. Looking at direct clients, so the blue bars, results delivered matter more than anything else, and that's a pretty consistent theme through all of our research, actually, not just in the UK but elsewhere, is the importance of results. Really stands out here as the thing that most influences the perceptions of direct clients. But so the quality of people, perhaps unsurprisingly. Your views about your firm are being influenced by views about the quality of your people amongst direct clients. These are people who have experience of working alongside those people. I think it's important to note the 40% here of indirect clients who also say that people have a significant impact. So they've got some kind of view about your people. Where that's coming from, I'm not sure, but they have some kind of view about your people which is having a big influence on their views of your firm more generally. Some other slightly interesting things to note here. There's the quality of thought leadership, which is not one of the most significant factors here, although by virtue simply of featuring on this chart is an important influencer. I think it's notable that direct clients are more likely to be influenced by thought leadership than indirect clients. And that speaks to the extent to which thought leadership is playing a role at the moment in reinforcing the views of existing clients rather than influencing those of prospects. I think there's a challenge there for thought leadership. So anyway, some interesting differences between the views of direct clients and indirect clients in terms of what informs a view, what influences perceptions of a firm. Let's just look at that again on a kind of break that down into a firm base, and we haven't got much time left here, so I'll have to hurry through this a little bit. But I just wanted to show you the difference between Capgemini Consulting and PwC in terms of the factors that influence views of them. I don't want to talk too much about the individual factors. The thing I want you to really notice here is just the difference between the amount of influence there is at all for PwC compared with Capgemini. So in other words, PwC's clients appear to be much more open to influence, open to having their minds changed about PwC than are Capgemini Consulting's. There's a sense in which here Capgemini Consulting's clients are saying, we've kind of made up our mind about this firm. Whether that's positive or negative isn't being suggested here. That's an entirely separate thing. But our views are kind of formed about this firm, and it's going to be quite hard to change them. Whereas for PwC, in stark contrast, by the way, to what we've seen in some other geographies, particularly for the Big Four, where views are often quite kind of set in stone, PwC's clients seem to be saying, actually, we're really quite open to influence here. There are a lot of things that will influence our view of this firm. I think that's pretty positive news for PwC's marketeers at any rate, but probably for the firm more generally, because it does suggest that the firm has levers at its disposal to shift perceptions, to change views. I say once again, that doesn't speak to the extent to which views are already positive or negative, but it does talk about the extent to which things can be changed. And again, we in our report we do these charts for each firm, and a load of other charts obviously for each firm, and see some really interesting differences from one firm to the next. Before I leave, and I really am going to have to leave in a second, I think it is important just to note that results really do seem to matter more than anything else. And I think that's, that you may say that kind of stands to reason, that's unsurprising, but it really comes to a very strong element of our research, just how important results are. I'm sorry if any of you are struggling to see the screen, by the way. I'm getting all sorts of messages flashing up telling me that there's problems sharing my screen with you. Hopefully you can see it. Suffice to say, results really matter. I think we saw that amongst direct clients they're the most influential thing. So really this is the most significant impact on client perceptions of your firm overall. Let's leave it there. We've run out of time and the technology may be slightly struggling. If you do want to find out any more about the report, which, as I say, will be out very soon, you can get in touch with Alice. There's her email address and telephone number there. But of course, you can find all of our details on our website. And if you have any questions, we'd be delighted to respond to those and to chat about things with you. So thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.